gathered here for a roundtable. We have 90 minutes together, so we hope you can stay for the full time. Today's presentations are going to be focused on understanding and tackling CII water use, and then our breakout rooms will have a chance to kind of hear from each other of what's going on and what's been working, what's on top of mind for this year. So with that, let me run through a couple of overview slides and announcements. So next slide, please, Amanda. So for our roundtable, since we'll be jumping into breakout rooms, we want to just remind us all of our roundtable norms, embodying and demonstrating respectful communication, being open-minded to new ideas and new thoughts and others, constructive participation, so making sure that you are sharing, but also ceding time for others to share their thoughts and insights, and in general, just being thoughtful of the time you all have together and making sure that your group is getting the most out of your time today. With that, I will share the agenda on our next slide. So welcome and announcements, which is where we're at now. We're going to have two different presentations today, one from our friends at CalWEP sharing all of the exciting things that are happening related to the framework and regulations, specifically toward CII and classifying. And then we'll have our friends from East Bay Mud join us and share a bit more about what's going on with them and their new guidebook that they've just recently spent a chunk of time updating and want to share with you all and talk about how they're using it. And then we'll do Q&A for those two. So feel free to pop Q&A in the chat as you're getting questions, but we'll hold Q&A for after both of the presentations. And then as time allows, I'll run through some examples of other CII-related resources that are available through AWE or WaterSense or other great organizations like that. And then we will shift to our breakout group discussions. And we'll talk through that when we get there about how we're going to manage that, given the wonderfully robust group of attendees we have today. And then we will bid you all adieu. So with that, I'm going to go through just a couple of quick announcements while we have y'all's attention. So first up is Symposium. Our third annual symposium is this year in August 6th through 8th, which this year is a Wednesday through a Friday, just noting date change from past participants. Right now we have our open call for abstracts, a few more days to get your great ideas in. They're due next Friday, March 7th. Would love to see your ideas and hopefully see you at the symposium. So all information can be found, and we'll share more information later, but you can find it pretty easily on our brand new beautiful website. My next announcement is for a particular project that we're working on related to peak water demand management with a few AWE members and contributing to some core case studies, but we're also conducting a broad survey of different utilities and how peak demands have adjusted in their communities and strategies that they're using. So we would love if you can participate or send to the right person in your organization. That due date, to avoid confusion with other people, is also March 7th. So please and thank you. And my last announcement, just planting a seed, given that we're talking about CII today, we at AWE have been exploring how we might help contribute to this space of CII and benchmarking and getting to better understand how CII customers are using water and what is high or abnormal water use. So we've got some questions that we're exploring, and we're digging into all of the great relevant research that's been in this space so we can identify the right niche for us. But if you have thoughts on this topic, or if this is something that you've been working on or have a particularly strong use for in your organization, we'd love to hear your thoughts about this. We have a new email that we're using for some of our communications, which is research@a4we.org. So we'd love to hear your thoughts there. That'll go to us at the program team. So anything CII benchmarking, if you want to talk to us about your ideas, love to hear more. So with that, we're going to switch gears to today's speakers. You can see all of the lovely faces here. We are going to kick off with Melissa Matlock, who's Director of Programs at the California Water Efficiency Partnership, or CalWEP. And then after that, we'll go to Anya and Geneva, who are at East Bay Municipal Utility District. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Melissa. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, everyone. So as Liesel said, I'm Melissa Matlock, Director of Programs for CalWEP. Next slide. So for those that don't know CalWEP, our mission is to maximize urban water efficiency and conservation through research, training, collaborative approaches and partnerships, integrating innovative technologies and practices, and encouraging effective public policies. And so we do this for California, and our members are made up of California water agencies and urban suppliers. Next slide. So some have heard of the conservation framework. Liesel mentioned it early on about what's going on in California, so I'm not going to go too much into those details. But just generally over the last couple of years, a framework was released by the state, really focusing on how to increase conservation in water suppliers, urban water suppliers. And in July of 2024, the regulation was adopted. So the past, a lot of agencies were really focusing on that regulation before adoption, and now we're kind of switching to implementation. Next slide. So it's kind of divided into two parts. One is an urban water use objective. Next slide. And so just high level, the urban water use objective is made up of several parts. You have an indoor residential water budget, outdoor residential water budget, a CII dedicated irrigation meter, outdoor water budget, water loss, and then you can do some adjustments related to variances, temporary provisions, bonus incentives. But basically, you add this up and your water use for your urban water supplier cannot exceed the total of these numbers, except for water loss, which has to be met individually as well. Next slide. So the water use is for overall water use for the urban water supplier. It's not individual standards having to be met, and the budgets are not set for individual customers. So that's kind of the first part of it, is actually meeting the objective. Then the second part, next slide, is what we call our performance measures. So these are kind of non-water saving activities that all the urban suppliers have to also meet. So there's a couple different components to this. Next slide. So the first one is that all CII customers have to identify buildings that meet what's called disclosable buildings, according to the California Energy Commission, and supply information about the water usage for these buildings if the owners request it. So they have to identify this every year. So that's kind of the first part. And then the second part that they have to do for performance measures is actually classify their CII properties with Energy Star, but we'd say plus, 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 and I'm going to show what that means next. And that has to be done by June 30th, 2027, and has to be maintained at a 95% annual assessment. Next slide. So going into more of that classification component, the regulation is established standardized classification of CII water users to ensure that, benchmarking is going to be consistent. It's going to support water use efficiency through targeted conservation measures and improved identification of your high water users. So like we said, by June 30th, 2027, all these agencies had to classify all their CII users using the Energy Star Portfolio Manager categories plus 4 additional categories. And annually, they're going to be reporting on this, and they're going to report by the number of connections by these 22 classifications. So what are the classifications when you look at them in all? Next slide. Here we have our classification categories. We have the 18 portfolio manager ones, and then the ones that were added were specifically about CII laundries, landscapes with those dim meters, any water recreation, and car washes. And one of the updates of car washes, if you do have a car wash, you also have to identify their other Energy Star portfolio manager property type. Next slide. So once you classify and you have these 22 different classification categories and all your customers are classified, what happens next? Well, then you start going into your best management practice options for high water users. So what you see here on this slide is different tracks for identifying your high water users. So one is just total high water users, your top 2.5 and top 20% classification regardless of that. They would have to start doing that by this end of June in 2025. So coming up very shortly. Another track that you could choose would be to still identify your 2.5% or top 20% CII users, but by classification category. So that would be 22 different categories with your top users in each category. And that would be by June 2027. So at the same time classifications have to be due, you would have to have identified your top users. Or then track 3, which you get a longer time for that, it's June 2029, is really that you're going to ID your users based on supplier defined thresholds. So this is going to be like, if you're looking at a school, well, what's going to make that school efficient? Is it the number of toilets, what type of school it is, things like that. So that way you could look and see if that's actually an efficient, customer or not. Next slide. So once you identify your high water users, the next stage of this is that agencies have to implement their 5 CII best management practices to each of those categories. Outreach, technical assistance, education, incentive, landscape, collaborative coordination, and operational. So next slide. So as you can imagine, that's quite a bit in a very short time to have to develop. And so we've developed resources at CalWEP to help these agencies with this type of process. Next slide. So here again, this is the large scale timeline for this. This is just CII. So none of those other components, these are the different kind of deadlines that are arising here that agencies have to meet. Next slide. So one of the first things that we developed, because disclosable buildings were meant to be identified in this past report that was due January 1st, 2025, is we actually developed a disclosable buildings toolkit. We took all the shape files of agencies and downloaded the CEC file and then kind of cross-reference it so you would know exactly what how many of those customers are actually in there. Next slide. Then what we also did is a lot of our customers in classification have NAICS codes. And so with the help of some of our member agencies, we had the NAICS codes do a crosswalk to our Energy Star classification plus. So here is an example of that kind of crosswalk. So NAICS codes has a lot, you can just kind of purchase them. And that has been an option of people doing classification, is buying the NAICS codes and then using this crosswalk to classify to meet what the 22 categories are. Next slide. And then kind of one of the last things around classification is that we did develop a CalWEP CII classification guidebook. It's a practical guide for CII water users. Next slide. So a little bit more on the guidebook. We highlight, help water suppliers with the mandated annual classification, provide clear instructions for classifying CII water, how to support accurate benchmarking, and how, again, establishing that timeline and methodology. Next slide. So one of the kind of things we developed in this guidebook is a checklist. So, one, verifying your boundaries, consider how you want to use classification in the future, and what type of analysis you want to do, because sometimes it might be easy to just do the, a certain type of classification, but it might also be easier to then do like sub classifications if that makes more sense for long-term use. Evaluate your staffing options and your resources. Is this going to be in-house or consultant-led? What are the current limitations of any existing classification systems that you might be choosing from? And then set realistic expectations for the classification process. How are you going to do data and analysis? How are you going to make sure that if staffing changes, that it's going to be continuous and kind of the same in terms of that? So developing SOPs, as well as then developing this process for how is it going to keep going on in the future, and how you might have to change your future, customer intake when you're getting new customers, and any customer changes, to make sure that you're updating this as it's happening. Next slide. So, some of the tools for classification is you have your existing data, you can geocode it, and then, you can kind of link it and do verification and adjustment using online GIS tools. Next slide. So one of the big classification aspects of the guidebook is case studies. So we have 4 different agencies that went through the classification process. They have different methodologies and approaches. So we go through each of those. What are their approach? You know, did they do it manual? Did they hire an intern? Did they use very fancy GIS? We recently also, it's not in the classification guidebook, but we did have a webinar last week, and we actually talked about how an agency was using AI to get their classifications. So a lot of really unique approaches to classifications. We also talked about stumpers. What we call stumpers are these different classifications that, like, okay, well, maybe it's kind of this, but maybe it's kind of that, or how would you define it? And so it's kind of a good question of like how people have made decisions on some of their more tricky classifications. Then in each case study, we also focus on our lessons learned, which is really about collaborating with other departments in your agency and other agencies. Use this opportunity to update other customer information or other requirements that are needed. You know, California has kind of a backflow prevention device program that a lot of agencies need to address. And so here you could kind of do both at the one time. As you're trying to figure out your CII classifications and you have to go out into the field, then you could also do your backflow information. You want to also make sure that you're evaluating your data providers and again, planning for this ongoing long-term program and making sure that whatever you are doing is going to be expanding long-term and can withstand what your future uses are going to be. Next slide. So here is just generally a large-scale timeline of the Making Conservation a Way of Life with the outdoor, with the indoor, and kind of the purple are those best management practices activities. Next slide. So, you know, for the framework, what we like to say is that CalWEP is the implementation partner for these agencies. We have cut sheets on each standard, we have slide decks, we have this crosswalk, we have the disclosable buildings toolkit. If you're looking to hire someone to help you do classifications or any of the other aspects of the framework, we have an RFP guidance and template. If you're looking to identify your CII DIM meters, we have a guidebook for that. We have our CII classification guidebook. We're going to be launching our landscape area measurement viewer for CII and residential. And then we have an overall large-scale compliance resource hub where all this and more live on the website. Next slide. And that's it for me. If you guys have questions, I'll be answering them in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. And we will shift gears now to our friends at East Bay Mud, and then we'll have a question period after this presentation. But again, feel free to ask your questions in the chat if you have any right now. So it looks like I'm going to shift it to Geneva first.
Yeah, hi there, everyone. My name's Geneva Gondak. I'm a water at East Bay Mud. And I'm here with my colleague, Anya Kamenskaya, who's also on our water conservation team. And today we're going to be talking about our new hot off the press, second edition commercial water efficiency guidebook that we're very excited to kind of sneak preview for you all today. Your next slide. So for those of you unaware who haven't heard about East Bay Mud, we're a public water utility in the San Francisco Bay Area. We serve about 1.4 million water customers via approximately 400,000 individual water accounts. We also have wastewater for about half of our customers, and we're a pretty large utility that spans many cities and 2 large counties. Next slide. So just to kind of connect to what Melissa was saying, we at East Bay Mud, like I'm sure all the other California utilities on here, have been working diligently to make sure that we're meeting these upcoming California regulations. So we specifically for our CII classification process. We're lucky to have already had 90 plus business classification codes in our system that we were able to kind of consolidate into the 22 categories that the regulation requires. That being said, we're now working through a lot of those stumpers, she said, where kind of our categories didn't perfectly fit into the 22 categories that we need to report on. But kind of, taking a shift today as we're about to talk about our new guidebook, we're really using this guidebook as part of our overall strategy in how we're going to meet these CII best management practices that are also required by the regulation. So we're lucky enough to have, really invested in a robust commercial industrial institutional program over the past many years that includes a whole breadth of activities from in-person audits to outreach to water management tools to educational tools like our guidebook. And so this is kind of how we're thinking about using the guidebook and how we think others might be able to use it. So the guidebook can help, utilities meet these California BMPs, specifically the first one that is, specifically about outreach and education by, providing this tool, this educational tool to their commercial customers. So we will be, utilizing, distributing this guidebook both in whole, but also in individual chapters to different types of businesses. You'll see once you get into it, and Anya will talk about it more, but there are specific chapters for many of those 22 categories, or at least the higher water using categories that the regulation requires. So, we hope that people will dive in, will utilize this resource, and we hope it helps everyone else too. So can we get on to the next slide? So, why might you be using this guidebook? Well, hopefully, if you're in California, to help you meet these regulations. But if you're not in California, or you're just kind of thinking holistically about the CII sector, this guidebook, it really is kind of a how-to of best management practices within many different CII sectors. Additionally, it could be really helpful to orient water utility staff, especially those less familiar with the commercial sector. It's, really a great read, I'd honestly say, to kind of get your bearings across many different types of industries and what their potential water saving opportunities might look like. It also has a lot of case studies of actual businesses like breweries and vehicle washes, cannabis facilities, and more. So you can hear about what actual companies, have done to reduce their water footprint. And of course, this was developed here in California in the East Bay, but we really tried to make sure that it was applicable anywhere. So if you're, somewhere else in the US or even out of the country, hopefully this guidebook will still be applicable to, your situation. Now I'm going to hand it off to Anya to really kind of get into the weeds of what the guidebook has.
Thanks, Geneva. Yeah, so as Geneva kind of set it up, this is applicable for a lot of different kind of readers. I would say that our core audience, though, are business and site managers, basically anyone that is in charge of the day-to-day operations of a commercial facility or a business. And to that end, we've got 4 core chapters that are widely applicable to just about any facility. First is the true cost of water, which provides a holistic look at how to calculate the cost of water usage beyond just volumetric, but also including energy costs that would be used to heat water and things along that line. We look into data logging devices, which can help track usage down to specific bits of equipment on a given facility. We also talk about common plumbing fixtures that are found in most facilities as well as restrooms. And then we've got 11 other chapters that are more specific to certain industries as well as types of water usage. And that's more of the a la carte part of the book. As Geneva mentioned, so right now on our website, which we'll show in a few slides, we have the book as a whole. But in the coming weeks, we'll be posting the chapters individually so that when folks visit our website, they can really download what's most specific to them if they don't want the whole thing. Next slide. And I see in a comment that we've got a link. Geneva will provide it, and we'll also be showing it in a couple slides. So as Geneva also mentioned, developers and utilities might want to consult this as well. And that's because if you're in the design or even construction process, but hopefully the design process of a new facility, that's really the best time to come in on the ground floor, so to speak, and set up that facility to be as water efficient as possible. It's generally much more cost effective than doing retrofits. Of course, that's not always possible if you're dealing with a building or facility that's, been built a while ago. But if you have that opportunity, we really recommend you take it. It can also be a really good resource for staff, especially when you're opening a new building or transitioning to a different way of operating in a specific industry. This will help staff orient themselves to water efficient ways of interacting with equipment. One thing that we haven't yet included, but is coming in 2026, is a water use benchmarking section that is informed by those categories that we're all scratching our heads over and making align with the long-term framework. We're actually going to provide anonymized data specific to our subcategories. So we'll definitely be sure to announce when that's available, because we hope that will be useful to help others benchmark as well. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, so I see some comments coming in about the guidebook. Once again, you can go to our website right now. There's that short URL, and you can download it. It is live, and it's kind of our sneak preview launch today. So we've got quite a bit of new and revised content, including regulations that have changed since 2008, and of course, new design and updated navigation. So we can go to the next slide. So just an example, design-wise, we've just updated it with hopefully easy to read takeaways so that maybe you're just skimming the resource and you want to make sure to get the kind of high-level overview of a given chapter. We like to present those takeaways in these highlighted green bullets as well as bolded areas. So if you don't necessarily have time, but you want to get the general gist of a section, it's pretty easy to do so. You can go to the next slide. And we've also removed some chapters. So industries have changed a lot since 2008. So we've said goodbye to our photo and film processing section, and we've said hello to our cannabis production operations in California and in other states across the country. This is becoming quite lucrative and common industry that does, of course, use lots of water. So that's just another example of some of the new content we have in the book. Next slide. Some other new chapters include the previously mentioned true cost of water, helping people really drill down on what it takes to run a business when you factor in water and energy usage. We're also looking at technologies that help users track their water much more closely, as I mentioned before, sometimes down to the specific appliance. And we did mention the cannabis production chapter as well. We can go to the next slide. And of course, those regulations, as I mentioned before, we've got the Cal Green codes for indoor plumbing fixtures, which have been updated in the last 10 years or so. We've got the California Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance and water reuse guidelines for on-site use that are regulated by the California Public Utilities, or I'm sorry, the California Plumbing Code and other legislation. And once again, as we all know, this is all within the context of our long-term framework. They're all working within here. Next slide. Another aspect to some changes is the navigation. So the previous version had it organized in kind of two main blocks by business types and water using technologies. There are also some guidelines around plan review. For this version, we've really moved towards the water using technologies. As I mentioned before, we've got those 4 core chapters that center around appliances and tech that's pretty much ubiquitous in just about any facility or building. And then those a la carte chapters where users can really dive into something that's specific to them and what's actually present for their building. Another thing to note is this is mostly going to be an online resource. As I mentioned, there are going to be chapterized sections of the guidebook to download. We've got lots of interactable clicks or links throughout the guidebook, so it's really easy to look at resources and visit other web pages that we reference throughout. Again, as I mentioned before, those individual chapters are coming in the next few weeks. Next slide. And at this point, we'd love to thank our collaborators, of course, my colleagues and the EB-MUD staff that contributed research, editing, and graphic design skills to this update, and a whole slew of external stakeholders, some of whom are present today. I want to shout out Michelle and Robbie. Thank you so much for all of your help and great work, and that of your colleagues that went into making this new edition what it is. And we can go to the final slide. So yeah, if you have any questions, you can email waterconservation@ebmud.com. Geneva and I can also put our personal emails in the chat if you want to reach out to us. And once again, there is the URL to download the resource. Thank you all so much.
Thank you both. So we will open it up to Q&A now. So for either of our or any of our wonderful speakers today, if you have questions on anything you've heard so far, feel free to either add your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand using the little hand guy at the top of your screen or wherever it's showing up for you. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. I see Kirk. Go ahead.
Hey, Liesel, how you doing? Long time no
Great, how are
see.
you?
Good. For those that don't know me, I work with mostly Canadian communities, and I've helped, like many over the years, with developing their ICI programs. One issue that we're running into up here a lot, and I would love some advice from folks from the bigger programs in California on, is this issue about engagement with more senior leaders in the organizations that you're like auditing or working with to try and get commitment. Like, we find that it's pretty easy to get engagement with technical staff or with environmental coordinators, those types of folks, but to get commitment from senior leaders and financial people is trickier. And so, for example, I'm working with Capital Regional District right now. Marie's on this call here somewhere. And we're trying to figure out like new techniques to engage with those types of folks to try and get more commitment to implementing audits. So I'm wondering whether that's covered in any of the, the regulatory pieces that we've talked about here today, or whether you deal with it in that guidebook. Just any advice on that piece.
Whoever would like to jump in, go for it, of our speakers.
Sure. That's a great question. And unfortunately, in our experience, I think it's really a case-by-case basis. I oftentimes, or sometimes the senior leadership isn't even in the same city or sometimes state as a given organization. But in the instances where they are, we really try to have our first meeting, sometimes even on site, with the folks that are on the ground, as well as those making the financial or larger business decisions. And if we're able to get those people in the same room, or even have some of those senior folks part of the walkthrough or parts of the walkthrough, they can really see some of the issues that might be present. And that is, in my experience, the most surefire way to get their buy-in. As far as when they're not physically able to be present, I agree that is a little bit more tricky, and I don't know if anyone else amongst the presenters might have additional advice there.
Yeah, and one other thing that I wanted to chime in that the guidebook might actually help out with is, as Anya mentioned, that first chapter, we titled it The True Cost of Water. But what it's really nailing down is to how to calculate the costs associated with water use. So for kind of getting buy-in from senior leadership, I think a lot of it too is being able to calculate the dollar savings of any water efficiency upgrade and being able to kind of clearly show what the ROI might look like for doing one of these larger investments. So I do think that first chapter can be helpful, the true cost of water, and that's one of those things we're thinking about too when we meet with especially higher up folks.
Could I have a follow-up, Liesel?
If it's short, yes, you can.
It's short. Has East Bay Mud ever, do you require some kind of like a formal commitment from the organizations you're auditing or working with? Like, do they have to enter into an MOU, or do you have anything that holds their feet to the fire after you, say, do an audit with them?
So for a general water efficiency audit, no, we don't require a specific commitment. However, our other programs do. So for example, we have a customized rebate program. So that is for commercial users for doing kind of more innovative water savings applications, and that rebate is directly tied to gallons saved. So the amount of money that we give is directly comes out of whatever their investment was, what the water savings will be, and is a multiplier of that number. And so they only are getting any of those funds if they do the project and commit to it. And so those are the types of suggestions that we'll give while we're on an audit, which will, somewhat tie the, try to kind of get actual investment. And then, that being said, the other bit of regulation we have a water waste regulation. So if there is some, enormous leak or some sort of water waste, then it does kind of tie back to our water waste regulation.
Hey, Liesel,
Thanks.
can I add one?
Thank you. I'm going to go to Bill next, and then I see some questions in the chat. I'll go there next.
Yeah, first
Bill.
place. Hey, how you doing? I am so
Good.
happy the guidebook is finally out. I have a lot of people in Texas that are waiting for it.
And
I
huge
think this
thanks
will
to
be
Bill for supporting it.
Yes.
Yeah. By the way, the true cost of water, I worked with Michelle Madaus on this. And also I've been working with Robbie Pickering on redoing their WaterSense for Business guide too. And as has Michelle. And I wrote the true cost of water section in there. So I'm very happy to see that. I'm just very happy to have it out. And I think that you have come up with a document that is going to help a lot of people across the entire United States. Thank you so much for this effort.
Thanks, Bill. And for folks that might have just downloaded it, a lot of the pictures in some of our chapters are from Bill directly in his many, many years of good work in this industry. So he's, definitely
Only
contributed a lot.
59.
While we're
Okay.
on East Bay Med focused here, there's a question in the chat asking about if you can share more about the move from business types to more of technology-based organizing principles, any data or program implementation lessons learned that precipitated that change.
That's a great question. I think that we moved towards organizing it by the water technology just because most people that we've worked with in the field, again, those folks that are boots on the ground really know their systems the best. And so we thought it was just one of the easier ways for them to be able to access the information that they need. Just because, they know what technologies they have on their sites and what's the most relevant to them. I don't know if you want to pitch in there, Geneva.
Yeah, I think that's really it, just to make it more user-friendly.
Wonderful. There's another question in the chat, but it's switching gears. Michelle, is your question about East Bay Med or separate?
It's a response to Kirk and just kind of a global comment about
Sure.
how do you get these technologies changed? I hear it a lot. How do you work with management? I'm going to go a little off grid and just be direct. So a lot of times when working with upper management, you need to rephrase how we're approaching the overall conversation. Typically, we go in and say, hey, you can save water, you can save energy, this is a good thing to do. I'm here to tell you that's not very successful. Water is still cheap. Energy is still cheap when you're looking at like a hotel, for example. It's more successful if you're okay and a little bit more vulnerable and willing to let go of what we love near and dear, which is water, and go in and say, hey, I found a leak at your dishwasher. This is a slip and fall hazard. Hey, you have leaking irrigation in your parking lot. That is impacting your customer experience. They don't like getting out of their cars and getting wet, and it's also in your parking lot. If you can use lingo that impact their business and their bottom line, they will listen to you. Kirk, that is the direct answer to your question. It's taken me about 20 years to figure that out, but that is the business speak they need to hear. Risk, liability, customer experience. If you can tie any of these technologies in this guidebook to the site and to an audit that they see, then things get changed, and quite quickly, actually, because at the end of the day, it's all about their business and their risk and liability. So taking what we have to offer and flipping the script a little bit will get you much farther faster. There's just kind of lesson learned, because I thought, oh, it's just take 6 months, whatever. Man, as soon as I put it in risk, it was gone in like a week or two. I was like, wow, that's much more successful. So yeah, and then or degradation or damage. That's the last one. If it's harming their facility, harming their parking lot, which is expensive to replace, or a leak in the bathroom for a room, or a leak in their pool, it's going to create more structural damage. That's what's going to move the upper management. They want to hear that. They want to know that, and let the rest go, and just focus in on one or two things that they need to do and get that done and be okay with, and make those the most important things that we want done on the water side. And then everyone ends up, kind of in a better place.
Thank you, Michelle. I love those. I've added them into the chat so folks can take that away with them today. I like those different examples you included. We do have one question in the chat, which is I'm going to bring back to Melissa. If you can share a bit of a high-level overview for our non-California friends about the water use objective and kind of what has brought about those regulations and how utilities are doing.
Yeah, so it should hopefully come to no surprise that California has droughts, and droughts have tended to motivate a lot of the regulation around water use. So 2012 to 2016 we had some pretty heavy droughts, and that's when a lot of kind of discussions started happening. We already had some water efficiency policies in place. It was called 20 by 2020, where you had to reduce by 20% by the year 2020, which that has passed. And there was a lot of comments about that of, a 20% cut across the board can be pretty hard. It's kind of a one size fits all, which is not really the case since so much water use is varied. So this kind of approach, had come into the legislature in 2018, and it was called Making Water Conservation a California Way of Life. And that was kind of the key phrase. And that's kind of what the regulation has been since then, is really about talking, and Liesel's putting some links in the chat. Thank you. So you can look up a little bit more of the history there. But basically it was talking about an agency objective, something that is tailored to them, but can still allow for metrics to show whether or not you're being efficient or where to target. So from 2018 until 2024, there was a lot of working groups. A lot of the agencies were participating with the Department of Water Resources and the State Water Resources Control Board to come up with what this framework might look like, what aspects should be considered, what variances should be looked at, et cetera. And so through that long process, it finally got adopted in July 2024. And so now we're in the implementation of getting all these agencies to implement this regulation. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Melissa. So with that, if you have more questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, or hopefully during the breakout rooms, you can get more of your questions answered. So join me in and thanking all of our wonderful speakers for their time and energy today, virtually, or you can physically clap like I just did. I'm going to share a few examples of additional resources. Amanda, if you'd be willing to pop our slides back up. And I'm going to challenge you all, if you are willing to play along, if you have any resources, guides, great resources, research in this space, examples, anything that you want shared with the rest of your peers today, pop them in the chat or email them again to our research at A4WE. We'll compile and share out so that you all can carry these great vibes forward into the rest of your work. So I'm going to just share a few examples of additional resources. This is by no means comprehensive, but just to let you know what else is out there as examples. We've heard quite a bit about California, of course, but if we go to the next slide, other states have developed great resources too. So here's a couple examples. One from Colorado, they just updated their WaterWise Best Practices Guidebook. And you can see the screenshot there of the different categories and the way they've organized their content. Texas Water Development Board has a variety of BMPs for different sectors. There's one for the commercial and institutional sector that's updated as of 2018, and there's an industrial one that's from 2013, and I would suspect that Bill's had his hands on those too, so they're probably wonderful. So just a couple examples from, and we'll have a slide that has all the links to these examples that I'm sharing, just so that you'll get those eventually. So next slide. Our beloved WaterSense, of course, has wonderful resources on their website. They have a page called WaterSense at Work, and their various resources are grouped according to these categories 1 through 8. Some of them have been recently updated as of like 2023 and 2024. Some of them are less up to date. I flagged a couple of those, commercial kitchen equipment in particular, although understanding is that might be updated and released soon, but largely the other ones are fairly up to date. This page also has great links to some case studies, past webinars, other related kind of tools, worksheets, guides, lots of great stuff. There's also, I have a screenshot here too. They've got one that's focused on the audience of facility managers and how they might use AMI, advanced metering infrastructure data. So that's another great resource to consider using. So these are WaterSense ones. We'll go to the next one. Other federal level resources. I love the FEMP stuff. So Federal Energy Management Program. They have incredible stuff. It was hard for me to screenshot all of it into one slide here, but you can see the variety of categories and resources that they have here, only one of which is formally titled Water Efficiency Best Management Practices, but you can see all of these other wonderful different examples where they have great resources. And this is really high quality stuff, just like WaterSense. So good stuff there. Next slide. Of course, Energy Star Portfolio Manager has water use intensity as part of this. And our friends at WaterSense have done a great job of pulling out examples of that WUI by property type. If you go to the website, which I have a link here for later, it goes beyond the median and also provides kind of those different data points of different percentiles for select property types, as well as the technical reference that's also linked on that particular website includes some additional key metrics that they were able to take out of Energy Star Portfolio Manager that recognizes per square foot is not always the best metric. So for example, they've pulled out for hospitals a gallons per bed per year metric, for example. So good stuff there. We go to the next slide. There's a variety of things like here for water audit guidance. Here's one example. This was pulled together in 2019 as trying to learn from what happens in the energy industry of trying to work toward a more consistent approach to auditing. And I know there's lots of great work happening in this space and great trainings available and great folks on this call that offer those trainings or help support that. So this is a cool example and a nice resource. Next slide. AWWA did a survey a handful of years ago on CII programs in water utilities. So this describes the variety of things that utilities are doing, different practices, different programs, and all the odds and ends here. So if you want more information about what others are doing on CII programs, this is a nice starting point as well. Couple more slides here. So if we think about what AWE has available that's more recent, we have our cooling technology resources. This spans a variety of things. So we've got our CTEM, which is our cooling tower estimating model. We've got an alternative technologies report. So if you're thinking about incorporating more of alternative technologies into the cooling scene in your community, we also have a tool that goes along with that. So you can compare the savings potential of different technologies over time, a nice how-to guide for these types of programs. And then we also pulled together a learning cohort that met throughout 2023. And so we've got a summary resource that talks through different examples of how folks are approaching this, lessons learned, lots of great resources in that one as well. And then I will end with another one. AW has a commercial kitchens guide. So this is really designed for those audiences in particular and covers all the kind of best practices and case studies, different elements to try to facilitate conversation and collaboration. This is available for members virtually, but you can also purchase hard copies if you want something physical to give out to your customers and things like that. So with that, I think this last slide, so just so you know, I promised the links will be delivered to you. They exist. So what we're going to do next is shift to breakout group discussions. So in a moment, you'll be automatically popped into a breakout room, but we'll go to the next slide just so you know what's coming. So we have a little bit more than, just about 30 minutes in these rooms. The questions will pop into the chat here shortly so that you all have them. So please stay logged. You'll be automatically sent out. You'll be automatically brought back to the meeting at the right time. So please introduce yourselves, assign a note taker to kind of capture the main ideas, any resources or examples that come through. Thinking toward when we all come back together, given that we have such a big group today, when we come back together, we'll prompt the note taker or whoever to put in 1 or 2 key nuggets from your room into the chat, and then send the rest of your notes to us at AWE so that we can compile again and kind of share out with all the great stuff so everyone has access to any resources or insights that came from the other rooms as well. Let's go to Sam.
Hello. So 2 things really quickly came up. One of them was from Kevin in Portland, talked about Conserve, this technology for slacking that I had never heard before. It clips onto the side of a sink and kind of rotates the water like a circle around to help thaw food. So that one was pretty cool. And then the other thing I talked a little bit about that was just brought to our attention, our utility, was this new thermal energy storage system from Train. And they are basically saying there's a way to get rid of cooling towers, provide building cooling while not having a huge energy cost impact. What they'll do, and I just learned about it, basically there is, they make a ton of ice. There's this huge reservoir that they'll store the ice in. And so they use the example of a 150,000 square foot building with a 600-ton chiller could save about $60,000 per year in electricity costs, about $20-some thousand in water costs. And it's really helpful for us because we're going to a time of day electric rate. So we're going to be taking a look at this, I think, to maybe, can we get rid of cooling towers and is it actually feasible? And they were kind of telling us if a company is replacing a cooling tower, it's something they should really look at. If it's a straight up retrofit of a functioning one, then it's still expensive.
Thanks, Sam. Love it. Any other nuggets from any of the other rooms? Love to hear them. Let's go to Thor. Jump on in.
Hey, yeah, let's see. Our group had a great conversation, varied across a few things, but a major theme that came up in almost all of our topic areas was basically the need for standardization of one type or another, whether that's, universal uptake of the NICS codes or just making sure that our billing systems are all using the, like our customer accounts folks are using the same classifications. That we've, so that was, and whether it's CCF gallons and whether it's per square foot or beds, et cetera, all of those things were kind of, we needed to get our arms around that. And then what was the other, basically, a big challenge that we saw in the surprising strategy category. We basically naturally gravitated more to the challenges than we did to a strategic solution. And one of the big ones that we thought was just being into the position of being a trusted source of information for folks, actually like literally letting us in the door to do an assessment or what have you, is exceptionally challenging if we're not off the front establishing long-term and productive relationships with our customers.
Love it. Thanks for chiming in. We'll go to Justin next.
Hey, so we had one thing that came out specifically regarding advice for commercial classification, and one of it was really about teamwork within your agency. And sometimes you'd be surprised at who your best ally might be on other projects going on that you could potentially piggyback on. So Ani from Vallejo was sharing, they're in the middle of implementing AMI at his city. And so they're doing a lot of work in commercial areas, replacing meters. And maybe that's a really good time to find out a little bit more about, well, if you're already replacing the meter, you might have to find out who you're serving to know if you can replace that meter midday, or do you need to come back at 3 a.m. before they operate? And so you might get to know your customers better through that project, and that could help with the classification project. And the other thing I would share, something we found out was, we went through all of our commercial accounts and classified them, and then realized, well, it's been a couple of years since I pulled that list do we have any new accounts since then? Uh-oh, I do. So I'm not actually done. And with that, needing to realize that we need to collaborate with our development services team to find out and kind of insert ourselves in the new account creation process so that we don't have this list of new meters we have to go work on every year. It's just as they come in, we can start that classification process or turn it over to customer service to do. Whatever the process is, we just need to have that conversation. So that would be some two pieces of advice for specifically the commercial classification part.
Love it. Thank you, Justin. Brownie points for your background, of course. So with that, we're going to wrap this up. Fear not, we will share out eventually all of these great resources and links so that you all can go back and find what's most useful for you all. With that, I will just give 2 more final plugs as a refresher for the symposium again, if you want to join or if you want to submit an abstract. And then, of course, our peak demands survey. Both of those are open until Friday, March 7th. We'd love your help and support with both of these things, and we hope to see you at symposium so we can continue on these fun conversations. And hopefully we'll see you at the next roundtable, if not at something else in the future. So thank you all for joining today and taking time and energy to share all your great ideas and insights with your peers, and hope you got something out of it, and have a great rest of your day.